Let's talk Tinkle.
Yay!
Tinkle for,
Hey.
first of all, amazing creator of one of my favorite worlds, Swordsfall. Afropunk World will tell us all about it because I would like your definition of what Afropunk is as well.
Yes.
But the amazing news we are sharing here with the world is that you have started the Kickstarter and it went ballistic and you got funded in the first day and now you're what, 800%?
in the
No,
first hour.
first hour? Is it
First
hour?
Yeah, first
50
hour.
minutes,
55
right?
My
minutes.
God!
55
Guys.
minutes. We were at 600% in the first day. Currently
right?
at 2,158% to go.
That
So
is
just-
freaking amazing.
Yeah, we passed 800 backers this morning. So
Congratulations.
That's
and
awesome.
guys, there's another 14 days for the Kickstarter. So
17?
if you want to...
17.
14, I think.
17.
17, I think.
I'm sorry. So
I need
now
the
17
spare
days, but you should go and check it out.
Yes.
Yes. So let's talk about Swordsfall.
Yeah, bearing in mind
Yes.
that T-Carl can't say the word Afropunk unless we all have to drink.
So let's
Tell
start
us
with
about
this.
Afropunk. What is Afropunk, T-Carl?
What is the definition of Afropunk?
It's actually funny you say that. There was a whole big Twitter discussion last night, and I ended up talking about it. So it's one of those funny things where Afropunk is kind of like if you think about cyberpunk in the 80s, where it just kind of got started. So the definition is very loose. So in a weird way, I kind of get to define what Afropunk is, like in a literary sense. Like no one's really using it. Like when you Google it, it's music, it's fashion. I'm really taking it literally. So to me, it's really just about being about anti-oppression. Like a lot of the times we say anti-colonialism, which is, true, but it's a little bit more than that, because you can take out colonialism and still have a lot of the same problems. It's just that in our modern society, it's what caused that. So for me, Afropunk is really just about a centering of what if the origins came from Africa and all of that sort of cultural heritage instead of Europe. And so it's sort of alternate world, but when you start thinking about how fundamental those differences are, you end up with a whole different world, like from the ground up.
Question. We did all come from Africa. You mean essentially like right? I mean, that's where we're coming from anyway.
Yeah,
but
like-
sort of
like
in
in
terms
a-
of early modern cultural development.
I see.
Well, like here's like a perfect example. Like, so one of the things that comes up a lot is the fact that like when we talk about something like kings, right? And the way that we think about that is no matter how you want to define it, it's always very much that classic European version of what a king is. Like you hear it, you think it, you're not thinking other kings from other civilizations or cultures. You're very much thinking that because that has been the standard. But then you start digging into pre-colonial Africa and you realize that they did use the word king, except it wasn't gendered. King just meant who ruled. So a king could be a woman. So to think that a king meant a man and a queen meant a woman is automatically gone when you start doing Afropunk. And it's such a small change, but you start thinking about it, starts rippling. So you start thinking, okay, if you have society where there's no difference between the ruler, it can equally be man and a woman, that sounds fine, whatever, but you start thinking about it. All right, so if you have a king that's a woman, her kids are going to have a much different sort of bringing and basically set up into the throne than it is in something like a patriarchy, because there's a very much difference between how kids are dispersed and all that DNA stuff, So you start thinking about, okay, starting off from that and it spins out and all of a sudden you're like, okay, I'm in a totally different world. Like you start thinking about 7 lines of female kings and that changes the whole dynamic. So in a weird way, just the concept of saying Africa instead of Europe changes everything, every little thing, every big thing. And it's that sort of butterfly effect. And that's been the fun thing about building Swordsfall is I can start really small and it kind of automatically builds itself out.
I see. So have you kept also the environments and the climates you'd expect to see in Africa in Swordsfall? I mean, is it designed to effectively have the huge jungles and rainforests and deserts and...
If you were to pull up like a map of Africa and then a map of Tycor, it's not quite one for one because I cut pieces and I changed it, but I very much took those biodomes. So Garuda is very much that Congo, West Africa area. But then when you look at Africa, it's such a, and it's one of the reasons why I was so glad to do it from this is because it's the biggest continent we have. and we know so little about it. You're like, if you watch like, I was watching, trying to remember which documentary it was. I watched every documentary, I think, on Africa on every platform, sometimes twice, because I was like, I feel like I missed something. But you realize that you can go 100 miles and go from a forest to a desert to a plain to a volcano. And that's just mind blowing. Like, you can't really do that anywhere else in the world.
We've been watching the Earth documentaries, and essentially it was one for Africa, and it was very interesting because there was a very big mountain range that, because it was stopping essentially the rainfall from coming, it was like desert from the one side. It was in fact a volcano on the mountain range, and then it was like absolute rainforest on the other side because all the water was actually hitting the mountain range and then falling into the rainforest part. It was absolutely stunning and mind-blowing.
It's crazy. Well, then you get to the point where then there's also a thing about animal migration. There's certain animals that are in essence trapped in an area because when they moved there, the environment changed around them. Yeah. So you have this huge mountain peaks where there's only one kind of gorilla and it's the only place they live. And there was the whole, how did they get there? And you start looking at, oh, well, they migrated there. And then it turned to a desert around them. So they were like, well, we'll just chill up here in this
so I live here now.
With these forests. I live here now.
5 trees.
So, and like I said, it's not something that you can replicate in Europe. I mean, it has its own unique things, and Africa has its own unique things.
And it's the same thing, I think, with the northern part of Sahara, because there were many animals that used to cross the Sahara, and then when the Sahara came out, effectively they got like locked on the north part, and that's pretty much it. They cannot go anywhere. There is nowhere to go.
And that's why you have tigers and lions that are separated, even though they live in the same biodome, because literally one traveled over into, that southern Europe, and then the deserts popped up, and they're like, oh, I guess this is where we live now.
And then you see, I don't think you're supposed to use this term for animals, but you see what is essentially a diaspora within a species, where it's like, this is the species as it survived on this side of Africa, and this is the species as it survived on the other side of Africa, and they become different.
But you have it also in Africa when it comes to mountain ranges, for types of the same bird having a completely different evolutionary tree over like hundreds of thousands of years, but it's the same animal.
That's exactly what I was saying,
Yeah. It's called diaspora, but essentially it is literally just being separated and then being stuck there.
Yeah, of course. And then they have different evolutionary paths, essentially.
Yeah. Well, like flamingos are a great example. Like flamingos only exist because they're trapped in that area, and the growth of their legs is literally to stand out of acid water.
Yeah.
That's it. Not to be pretty, not to look good, but because the water that they stand in to feed is acidic. So they literally grew taller legs and basically a pseudo exoskeleton. Like when you start reading about some of these animals, they're freakish. Like I didn't realize that flamingos had basically an exoskeleton on their legs. That's weird. Yeah. Who talks about that? Never, but it's such a basic thing. And you're like, oh, so that's cool. Like there's a purpose to it. And in essence, like the thing that's so interesting about Africa, especially when you get to the cultures, is that the diaspora in essence exists because the land will not let people unite. Like there's no actual way without super technology to unite North and South Africa, because the terrain itself is literally so dynamic and sometimes so dangerous that you're just cut off. That's just how it is.
That was a very good point that you've made there, and that was another question I wanted to ask you. I mean, you have a somewhat advanced civilization. As far as I understand, actually, you have quite advanced technology in some of the civilizations you have there. How do they tackle effectively this quite hostile environment, you might say, effectively, in some occasions for growth? Like, if you have infinite deserts, how do they tackle agriculture? And how do they, I mean, do they live in all of them in tandem with the environment around them, or is it a more of an antagonistic relationship they have?
And that's where, in a way, Swordsfall is more Afrocentric than punk, because literally to answer that question, the answer is the cultures themselves. And when you start to look at how they adapted to the environment, you realize that they solved that issue. And it's this kind of interesting dynamic where it's almost an African mentality of working with the environment instead of trying to conquer it. And I feel like that is itself a very important difference, because there's a lot of situations where I feel like there's a very like Western thought where we're like, well, why not just cave that mountain out or dig through that tunnel or just kill all those animals. Like, why would you not do that? But their concept was very much you live in the land and the land was there before you. Like, you live as a part of it. You don't control it. So everything was about working with it. You didn't kill predator animals. You figured out how to work with them. You figured out, oh, well, the same predator animal that kills you also kills other predators. So if we make it so that we kind of exist in this coexisting, they kind of leave us alone. We kind of leave them alone. And it's always about working with it. So I always whenever I go to a bio, I always look at who lived there, what did they do, and then I try to find what that kernel of truth is. Like, there's always a reason, there's always a solution that someone was trying to solve. You don't necessarily have to copy what they did, you just have to copy what the solution was.
Sure, so, like that mechanism.
It was like this documentary, which I can't remember which documentary was it, but it was the idea that there was a tribe that would leave the lions live because it will allow the lions to hunt around their area, and then they go and kind of very slowly approach them and have like a kind of like a not a face, like when you stare someone in the eye,
they stare them down essentially.
Yeah, they stare them down just to be able to go grab some of the piece of the food the lions caught, and then back away. It was a very interesting experience. Like let the hunter do the hunting, then you kind of share the loot. It was like a very mutual agreement kind of thing of like, what.
And it's funny, like that's kind of why for the world I call them professions instead of classes. Because, for instance, like a hunter wasn't just someone who went out and killed an animal. They were part farmer, they were part agriculture, they were part scientist. Like, they understood the animal. So it wasn't just the lion as an enemy. They really understood like what the lion's looking for. So in a weird way, they knew when you could play with the lion, when you could go into that territory and be fine, because the lion has its own things it has to deal with. So they had this weird way of understanding how it worked, and that's what let them exist with it. Like, for instance, you always have, everybody knows the story of like, say, Zulu, and they would go out and hunt lions, and everybody talks about that. But what they don't talk about is they weren't hunting lions, they were culling the sicker lions. And they were kind of almost building up the pride, So like when you watch those documentaries, like you kind of learn that lions have this weird thing where they very much have a feeling for other people in their pride or other lions. Like, it's more than just survival. They have a very much like I don't like you, or you're sick, or you might be dangerous, and they'll abandon them. So basically they would go through and they would basically kill the weaker ones, and that would kind of help the pride continue to grow. And it kind of built this weird respect. And there's a paper I read where they show how you can track lion migrations and see that lions knew to avoid certain villages, not out of fear, but almost out of respect. Like, that's not our zone, that's their zone. And there's always this weird coexisting with the world that I just found really interesting, that you don't really see. And that's kind of why it's a weird sci fantasy, because I always imagine that tech is what replaces where magic can't.
So how do you approach it? Let's talk about more specifically Swordsfall. Talk us about the world of Swordsfall in terms of the technology versus magic kind of thing.
So the biggest thing is the way that fuel and energy works is kind of like the biggest reason why things work the way it is. Like, because it was Afrocentric, I realized that in essence, fossil fuels isn't really something you can do. Like, if you have a world that's alive, that has spirits, you can't just dig up basically dead bodies and then burn them. You know what I mean? Like, that's sacrilegious. Like, if you really live in that sort of society. So there's a crystal in my world called a Zurian, and it can be mined and used for energy. The downside is that it's naturally harmful to humans. You touch it, you're going to have a bad day. Over time, they found out that certain people had the ability to touch it and use it. And so in essence, it kind of grew a profession where all of a sudden they realized this crystal can be formed and used as an energy source, and they can put their own personal energy magic into it. So I kind of created a sense of moldable batteries, because to me, it made sense in the terms of you have something natural. Of course, you're going to figure out how to use it, reuse it, because that's what matters. And then everything else tech spawns from that. So it's a very much a sense of, okay, we have a Zurian, which is natural. We can use it. We have this problem. How can we use A to fix B? So every solution kind of comes from that. So for instance, the whole southern part of Tycor is basically one giant wasteland desert because there's two suns, right? And the people that live there really could not grow and become a nation under this harsh terrain. So they were just trying to figure out how can we protect ourselves from the elements. and they basically used their own knowledge of magic and whatnot. And I kind of had it to where I imagined if you were a metalsmith and you also have access to magic, obviously eventually you're going to be like, well, what if I combine the two? And rather than it be a overwhelming magical, I just imagine it sort of pushing the material forward, using magic to make a blade with perfectly lined carbon. You know, it's a very simple thing, but it's something we try to do in tech all the time. And I just imagined it in terms of, okay, they understood that, but they had magic to do it, combining with tech to make steel and stuff like that. So they build themselves their own domes to protect themselves from the elements. So it's a weird tech and magic. They got to tech, but using magic. You know, it's more of a tool rather than like a way of life.
Really cool. Really interesting.
Interesting balance to hit there. In fact, I also like to play a lot with science fantasy. I mean, you know that, Janet, more than anybody else, that it is very important for me, my magic, to work and to make sense. And I really like the idea of like essentially using the crystals as a battery for magic and then essentially utilizing that to have technology that works with that. Interesting.
There's also story points, but it's spoilers for a future book. But there's more to the crystal. I love Easter eggs. I'm that kind of person, so like everything has 4 or 5 Easter eggs in it.
Good. That's also very nice. Very, very nice to hear. So talk to us about effectively books. Are you planning to release something after the Kickstarter, apart from the Kickstarter? I mean, I imagine it will take you some time to work through the Kickstarter assets anyway, right? Effectively.
Ish. And it's a weird thing where, because I worked on World Anvil so long, the books are kind of done. Like the books that are on Kickstarter, the only one that I actually had to sit down and write anything for is an Animalist. Like, honestly, that setting book is going to be World Anvil with just like, you know, more prettied up language and really making it vibe with the pictures. But that stuff is pretty much good to go. So awesome. My plan is to basically, literally what I'm working on today is writing out my documents for the artist, because I have 5 now, which is weird to say. And I'm literally just going to, as they put in art, I'm going to stick it into the document. We've already kind of worked out a general layout. I mean, I'm way farther than I think people know. Like, we already have a base layout. I have all the pieces. I have an editor. We've already been going through stuff. So my goal is that, like, by the time we're going to send to the documents to the pressers, I can start being like, hey, we also have this stuff. I've been working on like a couple of short stories that I have that I want to kind of do. And I have the book that I started writing for NaNoWriMo, which I thought I would have done by now, but then this happened. So I might end up finishing it on the next NaNoWriMo.
Well, Camp Nano is coming, of course. Camp Nano is, there's one in April, so
oof.
Maybe after the
we'll see what happens with that one.
Sit down and do a Camp Nano.
Well, I made the mistake of I didn't think this Kickstarter would be so big, so I actually agreed to do freelance work for a couple other people. So I'm literally going to be in another 2 little e-zines that I have to work on before then. So that's pretty cool. One of them is he's an Anvilite now, but it's the Crypts of Pantalon, and I'm going to do a little one-shot, kind of like a crossover. I'm going to bring over some Swordsfall characters into that and kind of mix and match and some stuff. So my separate goal is I want to invade as many different literary worlds as possible. Like, awesome. I just wanted to be like, oh yeah,
good aspiration.
I love this idea.
Yeah. So before we continue with any other questions, I would like to say that if you have, guys, any questions, I don't know if there anything came already, but if you have any questions, don't forget that you can do capital question mark and then colon under your question, and our beloved Secondhand Samurai and the rest of our producers will send that to us.
In the production chat, please.
Yes.
Not in the questions chat, because otherwise I won't find it. And by the way, that was supposed to be capital letters question and then your question.
That.
You said something that was really close, but was not quite that. So, BK Bass, yes, we were trying to talk about divergent evolution before, but missing the terminology. So thank you very much for throwing that in. We are raffling off, because the questions have been coming in the chat, a PDF called Overheard in a Tavern, Plot Hooks and Rumours, which is really, really amusing and fun, and it's got some great inspiration stuff. Whether or not you're doing an RPG campaign, whether or not you're doing a sort of tavern-esque medieval fantasy or whatever, it's got some great ideas in there and some great plot hooks. So it's a really fun PDF. If you want the chance at that, hit !raffle, because that will get you into the raffle.
Finishes in 5 minutes.
Raffle.
I didn't disturb my cat.
That's amazing. Do you have any questions for our beloved guest?
Yes, I want to ask you, do you have any advice, because I'm sure a lot of people have questions, about how to run a Kickstarter, how you approach the Kickstarter, what kind of planning did you do for it? Like less on the sort of world side and more on the kind of creation side, because I know a lot of people in World Anvil are really, really keen to go pro. You know, with the Sage features that we just released, we've got even more people who are interested in doing things like Kickstarters. What kind of advice can you give us plural for that?
Well, the first thing I'll say is the answers are pretty much already out there. Like, once you start really looking at advice, you'll realize that just about everyone who's done a major Kickstarter has pretty much done a post-mortem. There's a guy, someone on Twitter, DC, and he put together a fantastic post on Medium about marketing. Nice. And he got Daniel Fox from Zeinhander and Cecil and a couple other real heavy hitters, and they had a real frank discussion.
Amazing.
I basically took that copy paste and was like, okay, like, if you're not listening to people already making money, what are you doing? And honestly, the biggest thing, we talked about this beforehand, is it's a little bit of confidence, you know? Like, there's a lot of creators. And not to say that it's not bad to be anxious, but when you think about it, when you're doing a Kickstarter, you're no longer just an author. You are now a creator and you have customers. And once you have a customer, the whole dynamic changes. And a lot of that has to do with just confidence. Someone has to feel that if they give you their money, they're going to get something back. That doesn't mean they have to know everything. That doesn't mean that they know you. They just had to get the feeling that if I give you $30, I'll get something cool. So part of that just has to be being the biggest fanboy for your own stuff as you can. Talk about it every time, everywhere. It's on every email signature. I talk about it everywhere. I talk about the coffee shop. I mean, like, I probably do like 50, 60 tweets a day. I'm on Instagram. I'm on Facebook. I'm on Pinterest. I'm on LinkedIn. I'm not sure there's any platform I'm not on.
So do your research and be your own evangelist.
You really have to, because people will buy into the hype, but only if you start the hype train. Yeah. And no one's going to start the train for you. Like, other people will say they'll start the hype train, but you really have to remember it is your baby. No one will ever know all the perks like you do. And as much as someone can love it, no one will ever love it like you did, because you grew it. So you have to make sure that other people see it, you know?
We know.
And
we know so hard with World Anvil.
Yes.
We know. Oh man, all the feels.
And social media is the other big thing. I've seen a lot of people are really anxious about social media, which I understand. But the thing I remind people, social media is actually just the world at this point. Like, we're seriously at the point where it's harder to find someone not on social media than is on it. So we have to be really honest with the fact that social media is now the main way people communicate, and stop. Yeah. You know, so if you're uncomfortable with it, that's fine. Just find a way to do it that works for you. You know, if you have to hide yourself behind a name and a cute, you know, picture and a drawing, because there's plenty of people on Twitter that do that, that's fine. Like, most people just want to hear your voice. You just have to figure out what makes you comfortable so you can talk about it. And the rest of it is honestly just being as overly picky and perfectionist as you can possibly stand. Like,
I can see that.
Because, like, I'll tell you, like, I when I was going through and looking at other Kickstarters before I made my own, you can see that a lot of people make money on bare minimum Kickstarter pages. You can see that. However, you cannot take that at face value. You never know what someone did behind the scenes. You may not realize that someone put $20,000 into an ad campaign that you never saw, and that's why they got away with it. But, there's one thing I'll say that people have to remember. If you're a small creator, your Kickstarter page will be the biggest Googled thing that you will have. My Kickstarter page is on the top of everything else, no matter how long I've been doing it. It's above my website. It's above my World Anvil. It's above my Twitter. It's above my Facebook. It has more hits than any other platform on anything I've ever done, period. So you almost have to treat it like your permanent web page, because it never goes away. Your Kickstarter is there until the end of time, until the end of Kickstarter.
Very good.
You know what I mean?
Kickstarter and cockroaches. We'll survive the apocalypse.
probably will survive the apocalypse. And people keep going back to it. So if you make your Kickstarter look like the entrance to your world, which is what I really sat down and tried to do. I really wanted to make it clear that like it felt like a portal into something else. That maybe you had some questions, but it was a question you wanted to answer because it looks cool, you know? I displayed my best art pieces. I sat down with my graphic designer and we worked till like way later in the morning, just going back and forth and like picking stuff. And I'm like, does this look good? And he's like, I think it's good. And I'm like, yeah, sweat, it's okay, you know? And like, honestly, like, and one of the things that's been kind of going on, and I squashed a little bit, but at first I think people thought that Matt Mercer gave me a shout out of like pity or out of wanting to do diverse games. But he very clearly stated, and some other people offline have told me, that they saw that I came into the Kickstarter with the mindset of I want to be here and I want to be professional.
Yeah.
And all the big guys, they noticed that. They may not like necessarily believe, but this was kind of them saying, we see you, can you deliver?
Yeah.
You know? So you kind of just have to, it's like that classic, you can't just make yourself a part of a room. You can't wait to be invited. You just have to show up and be like, hey, what are we talking about? Oh yeah, totally. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And sometimes if you listen long enough, like you can find a lot of stuff. Like I didn't know about Kickstarter really. Like I kickstarted like one or two like projects, but like I mean backed them, but not kickstarted it. But you ask people, you ask questions, and you go, hey, I'm doing a Kickstarter. What do you guys think? And people will give you real honest answers if you're willing to listen. You know?
Amazing.
Good.
That is some fantastic advice. Thank you so much, Brandon. That's awesome.
Oh.
We have just closed the raffle. So just before Dimitri announces that, I'm going to tell you that I'm going to afterwards announce the winner and the runners-up of Dimitris's birthday challenge.
Before we do that, there is
Yes.
a question, in fact, from PB here. There are two questions, in fact.
Oh yeah, I see the previous question here.
Yeah, the first question from PB was, do you have an article on currency?
No.
What do you think?
Well, it's trying to think of how to do the TLDR. I don't have currency because if you look at pre-colonial Africa, they didn't do currency because currency makes no sense.
Right.
You cannot use it. If the government goes away, you have a shiny thing with someone's face on it. Like currency is usable, and especially in something like that, it's really about who you are. So I don't have currency. I have what's called sway and respect. Because generally that's how people treat you, and that's how you get things in something that's not a formed society with currency.
Well,
they trade with you because they know of you, because you've done something and respect. And you can get something out of someone because you have sway. They don't have to respect you to have sway, but it means you have enough about you to where someone wants to. So this is the long version of my currency because I don't have currency, but I have currency.
Very, very
Really
interesting
interesting
answer.
approach.
I was expecting that. Shall
What's
I
the
pick a
other
winner?
question?
Oh, the other question we had is why haven't you done a system?
Oh, I mean, I have a system. It's just I'm still working on it. And this is going to sound a little egotistical, but if I finish it the way that I think it's going to, it'll be blockbuster.
Nice.
Awesome. That's
Amazing.
a good answer and
Friggin'
a good teaser.
So keep your eyes peeled for that. Soon, TM.